The most dangerous invitation seldom arrives with threats, raised voices, or an open demand for obedience. It begins quietly. A respected person draws nearer, lowers their voice, and tells you something not meant for everyone. In that small gesture, an invisible door opens. You are no longer merely present. You have been admitted. You have been judged worthy to know. This is where the true battle begins, not in the public room, but in the hidden territory of the mind and spirit. People do not usually betray their principles because cruelty suddenly appears beautiful. They betray them because acceptance appears possible. The temptation is not first to become wicked, but to become wanted. Perhaps you have spent years being overlooked, underestimated, or spoken about by people who never troubled to understand you. Perhaps conversations changed when you entered, invitations ceased without explanation, and your name seemed to arrive in rooms before you did, carrying a story you had never been permitted to answer. Then, at last, someone important looks at you as though you matter. The ache of exclusion grows quiet. The old question, "Do I have a place here?" seems to have received its answer. Yet we must recognize the hidden transaction. The first gift is recognition. The later demand is allegiance. You may be asked to laugh when another is diminished, to guard a secret that conceals wrongdoing, to agree with what you know is false, or merely to remain silent when truth would make the room uncomfortable. No contract is placed before you. The price is collected gradually, in coins so small that each surrender appears harmless. This is the subtlety of influence. Force awakens resistance, but welcome lowers the guard. An adversary who commands the conscience may be refused. A friend who rewards its silence is far more difficult to oppose. Genuine relationship may demand patience, sacrifice, forgiveness, and loyalty, but it can never demand the destruction of the moral faculty by which loyalty is distinguished from complicity. A love that forbids judgment has not honored the person, it has recruited them. A fellowship that survives only through secrecy and contempt is not shelter, but captivity decorated as belonging. The most perilous social pressure, then, may feel like the fulfillment of our deepest wish. The battlefield is not merely between those who include and those who exclude us. It lies within the appetite that whispers we may become anything, provided someone important finally calls us one of their own. Before we can recognize the full price of admission, we must understand the invisible kingdom into which we are so eager to enter. Every room contains two arrangements. The first is visible: titles, duties, relationships, stated beliefs, and appointed leaders. The second is invisible: the hidden map of influence by which everyone somehow learns who truly matters, who possesses privileged knowledge, whose approval changes the atmosphere, and whose displeasure can turn warmth into winter. This map exists in the office and at the family table, in the church and among friends, in romance and in public life. Yet, we must not make the foolish mistake of calling every boundary corrupt. Love requires privacy. Friendship requires trust. Leadership carries responsibilities that cannot always be shared with everyone. A surgeon, a parent, a pastor, and a close companion may each possess knowledge that ought to remain guarded. Secrecy can protect wrongdoing, but discretion can protect dignity. The moral distinction lies not merely in what is withheld, but in what the withholding serves. The inner ring begins when membership ceases to serve a worthy purpose and becomes the purpose itself. The work is no longer done because it is good. It is done because success brings us nearer to the admired. The belief is no longer held because it is true. It is repeated because it marks us as safe. Friendship is no longer enjoyed for the friend's sake. It becomes evidence that we have gained entrance to a superior class of persons. The ring seldom publishes its laws. Its power depends upon ambiguity. No one formally declares whose jokes must be admired, whose failures must be ignored, or which absent person may be discussed without mercy. Yet the room teaches these things through glances, pauses, invitations, and sudden silences. The newcomer studies this invisible battlefield and learns that advancement requires not courage, but sensitivity to the prevailing wind. Nor does admission produce rest. One enters the outer circle only to discover another chamber farther within. There is always someone who knows more, receives the private call, joins the smaller gathering, or speaks to the leader without ceremony. Thus the appetite for recognition becomes a form of endless warfare. Every victory reveals a new frontier. Every promotion creates a new insecurity. We must therefore distinguish two kinds of belonging. In the first, people gather to accomplish something worthwhile, and fellowship grows as a consequence. In the second, they accomplish things chiefly to prove that they belong. One produces companionship, the other produces strategy. One frees attention for the good, the other chains attention to rank. The diagnostic question is severe but clarifying. If the admired people vanish tomorrow, would the work still deserve doing, the belief still deserve holding, the friendship still deserve tending, and the cause still deserve serving? If the answer is no, we may not be pursuing a good at all. We may merely be pursuing proximity. Yet no inner ring announces its true nature at the door. It recruits the conscience gradually, one almost forgettable concession at a time. The first toll is usually so small that only a severe conscience would think to name it. Someone makes a contemptuous joke about a person who is absent. You laugh, not because the remark is clever, but because everyone else has laughed, and because your laughter proves that you understand the code. It declares, without words, that you know who may be diminished and that you are willing to assist. The second toll is knowledge. A private confidence is passed to you, and then through you. Its importance lies less in the information than in the privilege of possessing it. You repeat it with suitable reluctance, perhaps even with an appeal for discretion, yet beneath this ceremony is the pleasure of demonstrating that you stand close to the source of power. The third toll is silence. An unfair accusation is made, a person's motives are distorted, or an uncomfortable fact is carefully removed from the story. You recognize the falsehood, but you do not challenge it. Silence is renamed tact. Fear is renamed patience. Submission to rank is renamed respect. You promise yourself that this is not the proper moment to speak. This is how conscience is recruited, not by one spectacular defeat, but by a sequence of rewarded retreats. What was once unthinkable becomes merely uncomfortable. What was uncomfortable becomes familiar. What becomes familiar is eventually defended as loyalty. The surrendered position is fortified, and the person who once felt shame now feels indignation toward anyone who questions it. The ring rarely commands betrayal directly. Such force would expose the battlefield and awaken resistance. Instead, it shapes the atmosphere until the desired act appears to be your own intelligent conclusion. No one says, "Lie for us." They merely make truth socially expensive. No one says, "Despise that person." They merely reward every signal of contempt. Thus, psychological warfare reaches its finest form. The captive mistakes, adaptation for judgment, and obedience for independence. At this stage, self-justification becomes the final weapon. We tell ourselves that remaining inside will allow us to exert influence later. We will challenge the lie when our position is stronger. We will correct the cruelty after earning sufficient trust. Yet while we wait to influence the circle steadily influences us. The price of future courage is paid with present cowardice, and the promised moment of resistance continually recedes. Even moral language is turned inside out. Secrecy becomes discretion. Control becomes protection. Jealousy becomes care. Complicity becomes unity. Dissent becomes betrayal. The words of virtue remain, but their meaning has been conquered. We need not imagine a hidden army of villains plotting our corruption. The more disturbing enemy is ordinary vanity, the simple wish to be approved, consulted, and preferred. It teaches decent people to cooperate with what they know is false, one socially rewarded concession at a time. Remember the progression, the laugh, the secret, the silence, the defense, and finally, the transformed character. Early resistance matters, because the final betrayal is only the first betrayal grown strong. Nowhere is this gradual surrender harder to detect than in romance, where being chosen can feel like proof that one has finally become valuable. Romantic selection possesses a peculiar power, because it appears to reverse every former judgment. One person notices what others overlooked, listens where others dismissed, and treats as precious what others handled carelessly. Private attention can feel like restoration. The heart does not merely say, "I am loved." It says, "At last, the verdict against me has been overturned." There is nothing corrupt in this preference. Love naturally creates privacy, priority, and special obligation. A beloved is not treated exactly as a stranger, nor should every confidence be open to the crowd. But healthy intimacy builds a protected chamber within the larger world. Unhealthy intimacy builds a sealed court in which one voice becomes judge, witness, and law. The tests begin quietly. Prove your loyalty by abandoning the friend who asks difficult questions. Conceal troubling conduct because outsiders would not understand. Accept humiliation as the price of vulnerability. Interpret every warning from family as envy, every disagreement as persecution, and every independent judgment as evidence that the relationship is not being honored. Us against the world may describe two people showing courage against genuine hardship, but it may also conceal an alliance that requires enemies in order to feel exceptional. If the bond grows warmer whenever another person is mocked, excluded, or feared, then contempt has become its common purpose. The couple is not merely defending love from the world, it is using the world as a battlefield upon which to dramatize its importance. Compassion creates another entrance to captivity. A wounded partner reveals abandonment, betrayal, or deep suffering, and the listener begins to imagine that love means becoming healer, rescuer, and guardian of every emotion. Boundaries are then portrayed as cruelty. Responsibility is postponed because the wounded person has suffered. The partner who asks for reciprocity is accused of failing the very pain they were recruited to cure. Yet, one adult's injury, however real, cannot become another adult's permanent sentence. Control wears an equally persuasive disguise. It calls itself protection, while deciding which friends may remain, what clothes may be worn, which work may be pursued, how money may be used, which beliefs may be voiced, and when silence is required. The surrender occurs so gradually that the chosen person eventually needs permission not merely to act, but to remain themselves. We must understand the distinction. To love is to become vulnerable, but vulnerability is not the abandonment of reason. Devotion does not abolish judgment. It gives judgment a sacred responsibility. A person who truly seeks the beloved's good will not demand that conscience be destroyed as proof of affection. The decisive test is therefore not how intensely the bond makes us feel, but what kind of persons it is making us become. Does it enlarge the capacity for truth, responsibility, courage, and honorable connection? Or does one person grow smaller, while the shrinking is praised as devotion? Genuine love gives warmth without ownership. Possession gives intoxication and calls the captivity romance. The same bargain appears beyond romance, though it changes its costume to suit the office, the sanctuary, the family table, or the circle of friends. The scenery changes, but the hidden government remains. In the workplace, the inner ring speaks the language of realism. An employee gains access to senior figures and begins to learn which failures must be described as temporary difficulties, which damaging narrative must be repeated, and which colleague may be sacrificed to prove sound judgment. Integrity is not rejected openly, it is dismissed as naivete. Alignment becomes the password, and the ambitious person discovers that appearing useful may require becoming safely untroubled by what is false. In the sanctuary, the same warfare adopts sacred language. A sincere question about a favored leader is called rebellion. Concealment becomes unity. Concern for reputation outranks concern for truth, while those who name injury are accused of harming the community they are trying to preserve. The ring protects itself by confusing the institution with the good it claims to serve. Thus, loyalty to a person is presented as loyalty to God, and the conscience is disarmed by the fear of committing a spiritual offense. At the family table, power is often exercised through an official version of events. Everyone knows what happened, but only one account may be spoken. Affection, invitations, and credibility are quietly distributed according to who will repeat that account and who will remain silent about manipulation or mistreatment. The dissenter does not merely disagree, they are said to be disloyal, unstable, unforgiving, or determined to divide the family. Peace is preserved, but only in the sense that the wounded are required to stop making noise. Among friends, the currency is frequently gossip. The group feels intimate because its members share the same targets, the same private judgments, and the same forbidden stories. Yet this is not friendship founded upon a common good. It is an alliance sustained by common contempt. Remove the absent person who is being discussed, and the fellowship itself begins to starve. The experience of being placed outside such circles is unmistakable. Conversations halt when one enters. Invitations diminish without explanation. Familiar faces become guarded. A person's reputation seems to arrive before them, carrying a verdict assembled in rooms where they had no voice. This can injure not only social standing but the very sense of being real to others. Yet moral clarity requires restraint. Not every excluded person is innocent, and not every private group is malicious. We must judge neither by wounded imagination nor by flattering appearances, but by observable conduct. Are facts distorted? Is silence coerced? Are honest questions punished? Is contempt rewarded as evidence of loyalty? These are the marks by which the hidden structure becomes visible. Such systems endure because every insider has seen what happens to outsiders. Even those who recognize the injustice help preserve it, fearing that today's dissenter may become tomorrow's target. The ring therefore governs not chiefly through affection, but through its control of recognition and fear who is affirmed, who is doubted, who is welcomed, and who is made socially unreal. 4 rooms, 4 vocabularies, 1 admission price, the surrender of independent judgment for protected belonging. But recognition alone does not make us safe, for the wounded outsider is offered a second and equally dangerous. Ring the fellowship of shared resentment. Exclusion is not an imaginary wound, to be misrepresented in rooms where one cannot answer, to watch familiar people withdraw under the influence of a false account, to discover that affection was conditional upon silence. These things can injure the mind and spirit with extraordinary force. We must not call such pain oversensitivity, nor use the language of forgiveness to demand passive endurance. A person may be genuinely wronged, genuinely abandoned, and genuinely in need of protection. But injury opens a second battlefield. The excluded person feels an understandable desire to assemble a counter-circle. Sympathetic listeners who will hear every offense, repeat every accusation, expose every private weakness, and prove their loyalty through shared hatred. The original ring said, "You do not belong with us." The new ring replies, "Then everyone who belongs with you must despise them." This fellowship brings immediate relief. Helplessness is replaced by a role. One becomes the misunderstood innocent, the righteous survivor, the person whose enemies explain every loss and whose pain settles every moral question. There is comfort in such certainty, for it removes the burden of examining proportion, motive, and one's own conduct. Resentment offers identity when rejection has taken identity away. Yet here lies the deeper danger. The first ring may have attacked your name. Resentment attacks your nature. It invites you to use the same weapons: distortion, secrecy, humiliation, and narrative control, while assuring you that noble motives have purified the methods. But cruelty does not become integrity merely because the cruel person was wounded first. Falsehood does not become truth because it is spoken in self-defense. We must therefore distinguish boundaries from retaliation. One may leave a dangerous relationship, preserve evidence, correct a false account, seek wise protection, refuse private meetings, or restrict access. None of these actions requires hatred. A locked door may be an instrument of prudence rather than revenge. Distance may protect peace without becoming a platform from which to celebrate another person's ruin. The discipline is severe because it refuses both counterfeit peace and corrupt victory. Name the wrong accurately, do not minimize it. Resist the wrong firmly, do not imitate it. Decline hatred, not because the offense was trivial, but because hatred gives the offender continuing authority over the shape of your soul. Refuse to rehearse the injury until it becomes the organizing story by which every new person is judged and every disappointment explained. Moral victory is not merely surviving what others attempted. It is remaining capable of truth when exaggeration would win sympathy, of proportion when rage demands absolutes, of compassion when contempt would attract allies, and of clear judgment when pain has offered every excuse to abandon reason. We are not forced to choose between silent submission and becoming an accuser in return. Once belonging through shared contempt has been refused, a better question appears. If exclusion cannot sustain friendship, what can? Genuine friendship begins not when two people become fascinated with their own importance, but when they turn together towards something beyond themselves. They stand side by side before a truth worth understanding, a task worth completing, a craft worth mastering, a neighbor worth serving, or a beauty worth preserving. Their companionship grows because their attention is captured by a shared good. This is the decisive contrast. The inner ring asks, who has been admitted? Friendship asks, what are we pursuing? The ring looks inward, measuring rank and proximity. Friendship looks outward, allowing a common purpose to relieve each person of the exhausting need to perform significance. When the work matters more than status, correction ceases to be an act of war. A colleague may expose an error without becoming an enemy. A friend may disagree without placing the bond on trial. Another person's competence can be welcomed rather than feared, because excellence strengthens the common undertaking instead of threatening an invisible throne. In such fellowship, truth is not a weapon reserved for rivals. It is the ground upon which all are willing to stand. Real intimacy also has no need to manufacture an outsider. It can guard confidences without feeding upon secrets, offer loyalty without falsifying facts, and enjoy its own character without despising those who do not share it. Its warmth is not intensified by another person's humiliation. Its unity does not depend upon a common target. This does not mean that healthy communities possess no boundaries. A marriage has privacies, a profession has responsibilities, a church has convictions, and a friendship has trusts that cannot be distributed indiscriminately. Openness is not the abolition of judgment. The crucial question is whether a boundary protects something good or merely magnifies the prestige of those within it. A couple may therefore love one another deeply while serving a purpose beyond mutual fascination. Colleagues may become companions through devotion to honest work rather than strategic visibility. A church may gather around worship, truth, and care rather than access to favored leaders. Friends may be joined by study, service, craftsmanship, laughter, or delight things they would still value even if no audience admired them. Such fellowship produces a different kind of person. It does not demand that one become smaller in order to remain safe. It makes room for courage, correction, gratitude, and moral independence. Its members are not held together by fear, but summoned forward by a good none of them owns. We must therefore ask a second diagnostic question. After time with these people, are we more truthful, more responsible, and more capable of loving those beyond the circle? Or are we merely more certain of our superiority? The alternative to the inner ring is neither isolation nor indiscriminate inclusion. It is companionship ordered towards something greater than status. Yet seeing the better fellowship does not remove the cost of leaving the counterfeit one, because the ring has often become part of the person's very identity. Leaving the counterfeit fellowship rarely feels like liberation at first. The door closes, the phone grows quiet, and familiar rooms acquire a strange coldness. Mutual friends hesitate before replying. Invitations that once seemed ordinary disappear. The former member begins to wonder whether integrity was merely another name for social failure, and whether the victory of conscience has produced nothing but defeat. The loss reaches far beyond companionship. One may lose a role, an audience, a familiar vocabulary, future opportunities, and the reflected identity that came from standing near admired people. The ring had answered not only, "Where do I belong?" but also, who am I? When that answer is withdrawn, the silence can feel less like solitude than erasure. Under such pressure, the mind begins to bargain. Perhaps the contemptuous joke was harmless. Perhaps the secrecy was necessary. Perhaps the control was loving, the jealousy protective, and the silence mature. Desire rewrites the admission price as a misunderstanding, because captivity remembered from the wilderness can resemble shelter. We must therefore recognize a difficult principle. Loneliness may intensify immediately after the right decision. Moral clarity does not guarantee swift vindication, replacement friends, public apologies, or restored status. Truth is not a machine into which courage is inserted so that social reward may emerge. Sometimes the cost is paid long before any visible good appears. Yet the empty interval contains a severe freedom. Without the ring's applause, a person can discover which convictions survive when they are no longer profitable. Work can be done without strategic visibility. Truth can be spoken without expecting admiration. Goodness can cease to be a performance before those whose approval once governed the battlefield of the soul. There is, however, another danger. A wounded person may rush toward a new circle, offering instant certainty, immediate intimacy, and a ready-made catalogue of villains. But withdrawal has not healed the appetite if we merely exchange one promise of superior election for another. The symbols change. The hidden kingdom remains. Recovery is usually quieter than recruitment. It grows through ordinary routines, useful work, trustworthy counsel, prayerful reflection, and relationships that do not demand immediate emotional fusion. Self-command returns gradually as one keeps small promises, listens without surrendering judgment, and learns that peace need not be dramatic to be real. The wilderness after departure is not proof that departure was mistaken. It is the predictable cost of learning to stand without borrowed importance. Loneliness must be carried with wisdom, not worshipped as virtue, and not feared as a verdict. To survive that wilderness and avoid the next counterfeit kingdom, insight must now be converted into a deliberate discipline of resistance. Freedom from the inner ring is not secured by one dramatic refusal. It is preserved through disciplines practiced before the pressure arrives, while the atmosphere is forming, and after the cost of resistance becomes clear. First, we must name the admission price. What must be laughed at, hidden, excused, surrendered, or falsely affirmed in order to remain welcome? A demand becomes less powerful when it is brought out of the realm of vague feeling and placed before reason. The question is not merely, do these people want me? But, what must I become to be wanted by them? Second, refuse contempt as social currency. Do not purchase intimacy with another person's dignity, even when the target is difficult, guilty, or absent. Truth may require criticism. Justice may require consequences. But contempt does not correct wrongdoing. It transforms another person's humiliation into entertainment and makes cruelty the password of belonging. Third, slow the moment of pressure. The ring is strongest when the atmosphere moves faster than conscience. Ask what is meant. Request evidence. Say that you need time to consider. One calm question can expose a command that no one wished to state openly. Delay, in such moments, is not weakness, but strategic self-command. Fourth, preserve independent relationships. Remain connected to people whose security does not depend upon the same leader, partner, family narrative, or institutional reward. No single circle should possess every mirror by which you see yourself. Independent counsel protects the mind from a world in which one authority supplies all facts and interprets every objection. Fifth, choose worthwhile work over strategic visibility. Perform the task because it deserves doing, not because someone farther inside may notice. The person governed by purpose is difficult to recruit through status, for recognition has ceased to be the hidden wage of every action. Sixth, practice proportionate truthfulness. Correct what must be corrected without theatrical accusation. Guard confidences that protect dignity, but refuse secrecy that conceals harm. Speak neither less than justice requires nor more than evidence permits. Integrity is not loudness. It is the disciplined agreement of speech with reality. Seventh, Establish boundaries according to conduct rather than imagined motives. Where there is repeated dishonesty, manipulation, coercion, or control, access may rightly be limited. Yet we must not build an identity upon diagnosing invisible enemies. Judge the fruit, restrain the harm, and resist the intoxicating certainty that claims to know every secret intention. Eighth, test belonging by what it produces. Greater courage, responsibility, generosity, intellectual honesty, and freedom to disagree are signs of relationship. Chronic fear, shrinking, secrecy, confusion, and dependence upon approval are signs of captivity. The hardest discipline remains, accept being misunderstood for a season rather than purchasing immediate approval with a lie. This is victory without aggression, freedom without isolation, and moral clarity without paranoia. All these disciplines lead to one final reversal. The person who can endure not being chosen is at last capable of choosing and being chosen freely. We return, then, to the quiet invitation with which we began, the lowered voice, the privileged confidence, the intoxicating assurance that we are no longer outside. But the decisive question has changed. We no longer ask merely, do these important people want me? We ask, what does their welcome require me to become? The counterfeit circle offers significance in exchange for the self. Genuine relationship receives the self and calls it toward greater truth, courage, responsibility, and goodness. One flatters our hunger while weakening our conscience. The other honors our dignity while refusing to make an idol of our comfort. Exclusion can wound us without defining us. Acceptance can delight us without becoming a throne from which others govern our identity. To be rejected is not to become worthless, and to be chosen is not to become owned. The victory appropriate to this battlefield is therefore quiet. There may be no public vindication, no defeated adversary, no crowd applauding our integrity. There is only the refusal to speak falsely, to despise conveniently, to conceal what harms the innocent, or to surrender conscience for recognition. Such victory may look unimpressive from the outside, yet it preserves the one territory no inner ring has the right to conquer, the moral freedom of the person. We must finally understand that freedom does not mean having no need for others. We were made for affection, friendship, loyalty, and shared purpose. Freedom means loving others without asking their approval to tell us whether we exist. Examine then the circles you seek, the circles you maintain, and the circles you create. Any belonging worthy of love must leave the conscience capable of truth.